What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our joint ventures of 20th Century Geek and Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm back with Julian to finish out our G.I. Joe retrospective with, I don't know, is it the low point? Is it a midpoint? I'm not sure, but we're going to be talking Snake Eyes, Snake Eyes, G.I. Joe,
Origins.
Yes, because X-Men Origins Wolverine was such a clever title that G.I. Joe had to take it. Yes, we're talking about this from 2021. A confusing. I've got questions before we even get into the film. We will get into the film. But how did we get here? Is my question. So we had two films. We had Rise of Cobra, Retaliation. Both did middling, to be honest. Not huge successes, not big flops. They sort of middling in both cinema and Blu-ray DVD sales and stuff. Not the massive hits I think they hoped they would be.
Right.
Waited years, and then we get an origin story completely unrelated. So it's because we've already seen the origin of Snake Eyes in those films, kinda. So we're getting a new Snake Eyes film following this. Is this meant to be the start of a new universe? As a new sort of reboot?
Yeah, this is a reboot.
I get that, but like my point was this the starting point for like a bigger, wider kind of? Was this meant to be kind of like, you know, what Captain America, Iron Man, and Hulk were, and everything to the Avengers, or was it? What was this?
I don't know. I mean, there's a special place in cinematic hell for people who look at middling results of things like the first two G.I. Joe movies or Superman Returns and say, yeah, they could be better. Let's go in a different direction that winds up being way worse.
Yeah.
And this is definitely one of those cases. I mean, that you could sort of see the logic behind it, which is like too much, those were sort of middling movies. They were kind of tonally inconsistent anyway. Nobody's really that eager for a third. I mean, after, there's not a lot of places to go.
Killed off most of the
we've
Joes.
killed off most of the characters. We can't really bring back, The Rock, like then it's a Rock franchise. We can't really, bring back Bruce Willis. I mean, he's going to monopolize time if he's given a bigger role. You can see why there aren't a lot of places to go with that, and nobody's really enthusiastic about it. They talked about doing a Transformers crossover, but that never materialized. And so I think the thinking was, let's reboot it, right? Those movies, had issues, right? But let's reboot it, and we'll focus on Snake Eyes, who's the most popular G.I. Joe character, and the plan is, like, Snake Eyes talks in this movie, right? At some point, Snake Eyes is going to go through an injury in the following movies, then he's not going to be able to talk. So the idea is that at the end of this movie, it's set up the next movie. This is going to be a trilogy of movies that set up, a new sort of G.I. Joe universe that has kind of been set up through Snake Eyes as your lead character. And that kind of, it's very much back to basics. It's very much, ironically, the first two G.I. Joe movies are sort of reacting to Batman Begins and to, Jason Bourne and, the Bond reboot, and going the opposite direction, right? Going the flamboyant direction. And that's part of why I love them.
Yeah.
This movie
it's a legit
clearly,
response.
yeah, and there's room for that, right? I mean, it's the Vaughn, Kingsman
Yeah,
approach.
exactly. Yeah.
This movie clearly says, screw that. That's a failure. We need to go back. We need to be the serious, Casino Royale fun, except also have supernatural elements. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So, but I think that's clearly what they're going for, right? And this was intended to be the first of a trilogy, right?
Yeah.
Stop making movies that don't tell the whole story.
Yeah.
Okay? Let's just agree right now. Fucking stop this shit. Make movies that are a complete story from start to finish. And even if it sets up another movie or gets you in a place where you can say, all right, the next movie's going to be Zod, or we go crazy with the, Magneto or whatever. Hey, at least you told a full story. And if this is the end, you've ended it on a great movie.
Yeah. No, I think that, what's weird about this is it's a prequel without a universe.
Mm-hmm.
And it acknowledges itself as its origins. Cool. An origin to what? Because I've not seen anything else. Like, origins suggests a backwards look. Like, we're going to look at the origins of this, right? That's the point of X-Men Origins Wolverine. It was like they were going to do X-Men Origins Magneto. It was an idea of like, oh, we're doing the Fox universe, but we're going to take a look back at the origins of these characters. Yeah, okay, cool. This is a prequel without a world to build to or build from. It's so bizarre. And, it becomes so convoluted. And you're right, it's a mishmash of films. Like the first half and the second half are two separate films, like massively so. That I was in my head. I sat this afternoon after watching this, and I thought, how would I fix this? What would I have done? And I'm the same as you. I said the two options. Either you're right, pare this down to a single film, drop a bunch of shit, or you make it all like a mini flashback and you give that sort of thing with the dad. In fact, forget all the stuff with the dad, because the stuff with the dad is ridiculous. Don't worry about that stuff.
Snake, look,
being named after a snake,
interject.
just being named after a dice.
Yeah, that beginning scene is so horrible.
Yeah.
I am so sick of everybody needs to be Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the charm of Barry Allen was that he was not fucked up. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, we don't need Barry Allen to be a traumatized person with child abandonment and parental issues, right? Not everybody needs to be Batman. Snake Eyes has never had an origin story where he lost his parents. I mean, what the fuck? I'm so sick of this shit. And then why is the killer using dice to be a gimmick? Why do you name yourself after the gimmick? That'd be like, if Jack Napier shot Michael Keaton's parents and Michael Keaton said, like, I'm gonna name myself, the devil in the pale moonlight.
Yeah.
Like, what? You're honoring your parents' murderer?
Yeah, it makes no sense. It's a terrible choice. Someone thought this was clever. It's possibly it's laughable.
I had to interrupt. It's
no, because you're right.
So
like, you start with this film and it's head scratchingly bad that you're like, oh no, this is starting bad, and I've heard it gets worse. It doesn't. It gets slightly paringly better. But one of the things that's interesting is, like you say, I would have pared this down to a single film, as you say. Just make it a single film. But like, you need him to become Snake Eyes for the finale. Like, that third act needs to have him as Snake Eyes. Now, you can still have him talking in the full suit and have him injured in the finale, and that's what gives, that's how he loses his ability to talk. Happy with that. Do that. That's great. Fine. But yeah, the fact that like he's only Snake Eyes for like 30, he's not even Snake Eyes. He's wearing the Snake Eyes suit for 30 seconds at the end is insane. Or the other way is you come out hot with not just this, but you go, right, in a year we are going to do Snake Eyes G.I. Joe Origins. I'm going to do Scarlet G.I. Joe Origins, and I'm going to do the Baroness or Destro G.I. Joe Origins. and you go, just it's almost like a statement of intent. Like, here's three films, again, pare that budget down, but like, here's three films we are doing, and they are leading to something. And you go, fine, cool, I'm in. Let's see what you're doing, and I'm going to give you more of a chance because it's building to something, rather than just going, we have this kind of idea, and it's going to be part of a trilogy, possibly, maybe. We're not quite sure. Like, it feels so timid in the way that they approach this that it kind of feels half-assed and neutered throughout the film, because they're kind of like, we want to do this, but if I don't know, it doesn't feel like the guts of it would be, what I mean. If it was me, I'll fix this. If this was me, this should be told in retrospect. You should start with a kick-ass scene at the very, very beginning with him being full on
Snake Eyes.
Snake Eyes, battling a bunch of ninjas, about to have a showdown with Shadow Storm, right?
Storm Shadow.
Storm Shadow, sorry. About to have a fight up, and then it'll be like, someone says something and it zooms in on Snake Eyes, and you go back and you get the whole film's like a flashback.
Yeah.
Because you've then gone, oh, I know where we're going, and I want to get to that in possibly the second or third film, but I've got to. And then you let them know that that's what we're going to get to. Like, the third film will be the story that leads to that showdown that you saw in the first film. At least have the spirit of your convictions to do something. But this film just feels so boringly neutered throughout.
And it feels so convoluted. I mean, so, it starts with this whole Snake Eyes, murder of, Snake Eyes' parent, father. We don't know where the mother is. And then we see Snake Eyes, not Snake Eyes yet, joining, the Yakuza, to find out who killed his father.
Yeah.
There has he been doing investigations on his own? I mean,
well, apparently he committed his entire life to finding out who killed his father, but has done nothing to do it since.
I mean, this is such a cliche of like, I'm going to, I'm defined by revenge. And again, this is not Snake Eyes' character.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, so, I mean, the idea of you're suspicious of the Yakuza, you don't want to join them, but you'll do it to find out the killer of your father, who you've done nothing about. And then minutes later, you turn on the Yakuza because you're not willing to commit a murder, and then you flee, in this extended, scene, which is mostly not good.
Mm-hmm.
Along with, obviously the guy who's Storm Shadow. And then we find out that was a trick. It's like the rug has been pulled out from under us like 4 times by the time that we are 30 minutes into this movie. There's no first arc, second arc, third arc. It's just like a series of shit happens. And you are so decentralized from, I mean, this is Snake Eyes' JoJo origins. You should, if nothing else, identify with and like Snake Eyes, right? This movie manages to make you feel as distant as possible from Snake Eyes for the first, right away demolishes this point. Now, I have real admiration for it, for having Snake Eyes be a traitor who's reporting to the Yakuza. I think that's a brave, bold choice. It's in a movie that doesn't work and is confused, but I will give it points for that. But it is astounding to me that first 30 minutes is just astoundingly poorly chosen.
Well, it's one of those things. This is a trilogy, yet it packs so much into the first film. It is like the first 30 minutes is just sort of like, this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. None of it seems to be connected. It's not like this happens, and because of that, this then happens, or he then does this, or then does that. Everything feels really arbitrary. Like, I want to find out who my father is. I can find out for you. I can do, like, okay, I'm going to join the Yakuza, and I'm going to basically work from the bottom up. Fish boy and all this other stuff. Like, he just happens to be working, but then they know. Why him? Why was he picked to be the one that could
The infiltrator,
to infiltrate the
Tommy.
the Arishkagi. Like, why is he chosen? Like, there's never a
Well,
conversation that's. I know it's supposed to, because then you get the reveal.
Here's another question. That's a very good question. Concomitant is why the fuck was Tommy infiltrating them when everybody knows what Tommy looks like?
Yeah.
He's the heir apparent to a ninja clan and the avowed enemy of the Yakuza, and he is not wearing a mask.
I was also, what was his motivation in the sense of, like, yes, he's infiltrated. Like you say, yeah, he's clearly, they know who he is, which is ridiculous. Like, he's got this kind of fake character persona he's putting on, but that never works. But more than that, when they go home to Tokyo, and they've got this.
I'm thinking of like MacGruber when they send the woman and they're like, "That's not the her." Start shooting.
Yeah,
like, that's what should have happened the moment Tommy infiltrated the Yakuza. They're like, "Hey, you look just like the heir apparent of the Arashikage. Kill him."
That's what I was kind of confused, because when they get back to Tokyo and you meet the Arashikage, like, they're like, "We are a band of ninja. We are in silent and unseen." And I'm like, then why aren't you sending, like, your ninja soldiers to go do this job to beat the Yakuza? Like, what was the point of this? I'm really confused by the opening of this film. Like, the first half an hour is so head-scratchingly confusing. Like, none of it makes any sense. I mean, it has a couple of, like, it's one of those that, like, they clearly, what it was, I could see this, right? They are working up to a scene. They are working up to a moment. And I could, as I was watching this, they've started with, we want a scene in which a lorry is plowing through basically ends up in the docks, and it is filled with swords. And you have Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes in the cabin, but surrounded by swords. That is a cool shot. It's a cool idea. Very reminiscent of, like, the early Wolverine with him full, getting arrows and stuff all in him and all that kind of stuff. It's a cool shot, but I'm going like, oh, you clearly had this idea and you've worked backwards from that. And that's how you've put this together. But then straight from that, like, they've been chased. They've got away by what? 100 yards, if that, before they crash. And then Snake Eyes falls out the van, out the lorry.
He's been stabbed.
He's been stabbed.
Right? I mean, yeah. I don't know how you have all these swords going through the cab and you survive. I mean, you see from the outside, like, it's a pincushion. You're dead.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cool looking shot. I like all this, right? But he falls out. He's been stabbed. He's bleeding. He then wakes up on a plane on the way to Tokyo. And in my head, I'm going, you were stopped by 2 police cars, and that's never acknowledged. So what, did the Arashikage pay off the police? Is that how that works?
It's waved away in, like, one line of dialogue.
Yeah.
But, right, it's yet another narrative jump that distances you from the characters and So you said, like, what would you do for this movie? I think,
other than not watch it again. I think that's the
Well, I think that, the essence of this movie is Snake Eyes traumatized, messed up in the head, recovering and finding his place with the Arashikage clan, and then it going south, right? I mean, that is essentially Snake Eyes' origin, right? And in the original comics, he was fucked up by Vietnam, and where Tommy had also served and had lost his family, so he in a car crash, so he had nowhere to go, and Tommy kind of took him in, and then of course there's the assassination, and things go south, but I was struck by not that many years before, around the same time, but not that many years before, it was The Wolverine, which I still think is sort of,
I like that film.
I very strongly think it's the best of the 3 Wolverine films. I think it's better than Logan. And so much of why I love that is because it really is an American sort of, like, Kurosawa movie. It is in love with Japan. And it is in love with just the texture of Japan, the feel, the foreignness of Japan. it is able to present an American in Japan that is both in love with Japan and bewildered by Japan. And that's what this, and I thought that's what
sorry,
this movie needs to
Canadian.
be.
Before we get notes, it's a Canadian in Japan.
Okay.
Just
Well,
we
yeah,
will
I
get
once said Bill Shatner was an American treasure, and I got a lot of people mad. He's fucking Canadian. All right. Um, you know,
yeah,
you know,
we'll
uh,
acknowledge that and move on. But yeah,
yeah, I was going to say, just, that's awesome. We never bothered to cross the parallel and conquer you. Um, that they're very proud of having defeated us, they think, in the War of 1812, but we'll move on. No, so, but I mean, I thought the Wolverine does such a better job of showing exactly this.
Mm.
I mean, it's astounding what's missing here. I mean, that's essentially the plot, right? And yes,
Mm.
you need a villain, so the Yakuza is there in this one. But it's astounding to me that if that is the core of your story, right, is Snake Eyes finds meaning and brotherhood, and then loses it, somewhat, with the Arashikage clan. There are none of those scenes. I mean, like, Shogun on FX does a better job of this.
Mm.
The Wolverine did a better job of this. This movie is not in love with that clan. It's not in love with that setting. It's not
Have
in
you ever
love with the
seen
mystery of
when I ever think
Snake
about
Eyes
these?
coming there.
No, whenever I think about this thing, even like the Wolverine. Have you ever seen Ridley Scott's Black Rain with
Oh
Michael
yeah, sure.
Douglas? And I
Yeah,
think
it's a
that
good movie.
that's a good movie. It does exactly the same thing
Is
of
it
like
Black Rain or Ronin?
no Black Rain the
It's Black Rain, yeah.
yeah but he and that's the same
Where he's
thing
in
like
Japan and
yeah, and that's again
his
like
partner gets killed and
yeah, that's a great film, but it's the same thing of like struggling with the cultural differences, being that belligerent sort of American attitude and that trying to sort of come up against sort of certain things in Japan, and that like works really well. And I just think, yeah, it's just an odd one that, like you say, it's not difficult to do, but this film kind of ignores it completely.
well, because this, I mean, even looking back at those beginning, it wants to be an espionage movie, it wants to be
Hmm.
an action movie, it wants to be all these different things. It's got to give this superhero origin to Snake Eyes with the dice. It's got to, be a Yakuza movie. It highlights that, the truck scene with I mean, all of the action series scenes in this, all of them are kind of good, but ultimately totally forgettable. And you can
Yes.
see where they spent money.
Mm.
I mean, you can see money and love put into these scenes, but they are all ultimately disposable action sequences that don't really stick in the memory. And they're kind of good and
Yeah.
impressive in certain respects, but none of those things stick in the memory. None of them are lasting or make an impression or touch you in any way. And the Wolverine managed to touch me more in its depiction
Yeah.
of Japan than this movie does, and that floors me.
Do I need to get the doll just to show you where, just so you can show the public where no,
That's not funny.
the thing is, you make a really good point there about that. That's actually really important because you're right. The action in this is actually, I think, really well choreographed. I think some of it's pretty well shot. And then it's sort of there's others that are just muddy and confusing, and it's never quite clear. But there's other shots that are really good. Like some of the sets are fantastic. But the fact is, because I don't care about anybody in this film, like it means nothing. So you might as well just be playing a computer game and going, yeah, all right, it's just pixels on a screen fighting. Like it's irrelevant. Like it means nothing. I mean, the tell for me is when it finally comes down to the end and the betrayal is revealed, and Storm Shadow and that sort of, um, you know, loses his shit with Snake Eyes, and you're supposed to feel that betrayal. I'm just rather than feeling the betrayal, I'm just kind of like numb or kind of like almost a little bit confused, where I'm like, oh, sorry, I've missed something here. Like, oh yeah, that's why, isn't it? Because of that third twist that came in the sort of second act. Oh yeah, that's right. And I'm going like, well, hang on, no. Again, it's one of those things. have a conversation. Can we just sort of like, he has done all this stuff for you, and yes, you've led to this point, but like, he's still on your side. He was doing it to, for this thing about his father. Like, it kind of like feel, you never see. I don't think we know much about Storm Shadow's parents. Like, his grandmother's there. She's the head of the clan.
Mhm.
Where's his parents? Like, should he not have a similar thing where he should able to sympathise? I don't know. It just feels so bitty, and so sort of the characters feel so all over the place. I'm like, oh, okay, this is. I don't care about any of this. And the final fight, I'm just like, I'm going to enjoy this because it's kind of like some of the action's good, but generally,
Yeah.
like, it's just watching a thing. So yeah, it's
It
just
feels
frustrating at the end.
perfunctory, right?
Yes,
I mean, it's this kind of like hollowness that
yes,
pervades Hollywood today, where where we've talked about, like, you have all of the elements of a great climax, but none of it works because we don't care about the characters and believe in the setting, right? This is the
yeah.
essence of that. I mean, it's like the characters feel like little pawns being, cardboard pawns being maneuvered
Mm.
on a chessboard, as opposed to rich, full people that we identify with and feel something for. I mean, if I cannot be moved by a shot of somebody sitting in a Japanese courtyard, I mean, I move to tears routinely by
Mm.
shit like that. I mean, if I can't be moved by that, like, how have you not done that?
Well,
There's no character here. I mean, they're
well,
just these pawns being moved around.
how much I realize at the end of towards the end of the film, how much I don't care about these is when I when I find that actually I'm more invested and more intrigued by the relationship between Scarlet and the Baroness than the main characters. And I'm like, when they're bitching at each other, and I'm like, oh no, I want more of this. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I want the sort of like the shitty buddy cop film between the Baroness and Scarlet where they've got to do something like that's the film I want now. And I love Samara Weaving who plays Scarlet. Like, I've seen her in a couple of things that I just think she's
Yeah, she's
great.
good.
Yeah. So yeah, but at the end I'm going like, I want more of them, and I'm going, oh, that's not good. If I'm thinking about that film that doesn't exist rather than this film, tells me like where.
Yeah, and even there, it's not like you have Scarlet and the Baroness. I mean, and Scarlet's done great, right?
Mm,
I mean, we meet her, and it's basically just a scene establishing in a bathroom she's a badass,
yeah.
who no prisoners, no apologies. It's a great way of introducing her.
Hmm.
Um, the Baroness is a lot closer than Sienna Miller's, version from Rise of Cobra, but doesn't look the part to me. Doesn't have the gravitas that,
Yes.
Sienna Miller, that, just that, commanding presence. But has the backstory, and on paper is closer to the
Mm.
Baroness that, she should be. Uh, but again, why? Yeah, they're sort of like perfunctory. They're in this movie to establish, like, Joe and Cobra are around. You better watch this movie because we'll be including them in the next two movies that we'll never make.
Well, that's the bit when this. So this, I want to just, I do want to talk because that point when you meet Scarlet, and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh no, she'll be okay. She's with the Joes." And Snake Eyes is like, "Well, who are the Joes?" And they go, "Oh, it's just this paramilitary blah 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 blah." You go, oh, "Okay, this just happens to be tied into Cobra as well, where the Yakuza are selling weapons to Cobra." All right, cool. Fine. I actually kind of like that. It makes sense. All right, that's fine. Good. So who's Cobra? And they give this sort of thing, and you're like, cool. All right, that's good. That's enough. Don't need any more. You've made that connection. But like, yeah, to bring them in, and I don't know, it just again, it feels like there's another layer where you've gone, like you said, you've started with a film, and you've gone, this film is a martial arts revenge film. That's what the first hour, or the first sort of half an hour tells you it is. This is a gangster. It's a martial arts gangster revenge film, right? He's looking for the man who killed his father, and he's going to be. Yeah, that's what it's going to be. Okay, and then it's like, no, no, no. This is a ninja martial arts film, and it's going to be about espionage and this organization that is actually for good in Japan. Okay, okay, and we're going to have like the hard master and the blind master. So we're still leaning into those sort of kung fu martial art 70s film tropes. All right, I'm happy with that. I like the guys you've got playing those characters. Oh, and there's giant snakes. And I'm like, What? Hey, yeah. We have giant snakes that have like sentience in a pit.
God.
You go, what? Oh, yeah. All right. And also, Snake Eyes barely flinches at this. He just sort of takes it on as the third task. And I'm like, no. Sorry, what's? Can we acknowledge this is almost like Conan the Barbarian? Like, what are we doing here? And then it goes on to the next bit where they're like, right, now we're going to do this other thing, and we're going to introduce a mystical stone that shoots
Oh
fire.
God.
And
The
I'm like, oh,
stone
wait, what?
is, how did they get it? Like I mean, it's like, I know that's part of the sort of mystical origin of the clan, but it's like, this belongs, in Lord of the Rings. This does not
The,
belong in this
no,
movie. The
the end of this
snakes are
film.
kind of part of that too. I mean, how, but also, like, this is a clan that has, the goddess came down and gave them the stone, right? Or whatever it is. I mean, maybe there's a sci-fi
Meteorite.
explanation. We don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Okay. But also there are, snakes that detect good and evil, right? They're like dogs who see, ghosts, right? They detect whether you're pure of heart. All this pure of heart stuff is such nonsense in this movie.
I mean,
Um,
this feels so insanely sort of like Robert E. Howard Conan, where Conan, when you like, they'll be like, "Oh, barbarian, they will see that you are pure of heart," and he'd be like, "By Crom," and then just chop their heads off, and that'd be it. And you'd be like, "Move on." It just feels so silly. It feels so odd. This film.
yeah, and I kind of like the first challenge with the cop, right?
Yeah,
I
that's
mean, I think
cool.
the
Yeah,
solution
that's
the
cool.
solution is obvious, and
Yeah,
what
first
I
thing
would
I
have
would have
done,
done. Yeah,
first thing I would have done too.
yeah.
But at least it's encouraging you to think outside of the box, and it's telling you that, like, even though this is a ninja clan, this is not about,
Mhm.
defeating your enemy through violence, right? We're about being smart and, achieving the ends that we want. And violence is a tool that we are good at, but it is solely a tool.
Mhm.
Um, and I love all of this stuff, right? But why do the three challenges take the entire movie? I mean, like, that should be part of that training sequence. At some point, somebody looked at that script and said, "We need to stretch that out,"
Mhm.
right? So, because this is a prequel film, it's all about his training. So there's going to be lots of time, and then we're going to have these mystical snakes, that happen to live, in a pit that's never closed. So people can fall in all the time. They're going down there to clean up the leaves, like every day. I don't fucking know.
Giant
It,
mice get thrown down there for the giant snakes to eat. I don't know.
what do they? Yeah, what do they live on? Well, I don't know. It's all very strange. And there's a lot of just, like, this wants to be like a hard nosed espionage movie at the same time that it wants to be like a mystical sci-fi, mystical kung fu movie. You know,
It doesn't
uh,
know what it wants to be. I mean, there's a scene right at the end in the final act when the goodies are all sort of like lined up walking towards the villains, and you've got like an old woman stood in the middle who's the leader of the clan, the Baroness and Scarlet, Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, and a couple of other peeps that are sort of like, semi-important, Hardmaster and Blind Master or whatever. And there's a moment as they're walking out from that set, there is like that. My response is like, this is not the film that this started as. This is not the first. This is not the film that was advertised in the first 10 to 20 minutes of this film. Like, you can do that. That's not a problem. Like, and go from this is the real world, and now you've transitioned into this sort of like, oh, this is you live in that, the Matrix kind of thing, isn't it? Like, that's the world,
mhm.
but actually underneath that, here's this mystic world that exists, Neverwhere and Harry Potter, for Christ's sake, does it. Like, you can do that, but like, at least know you're doing that. I mean, the fact that it introduces a MacGuffin, this stone, this MacGuffin gets introduced like for the third act to be used
Yeah.
in the third act is such poor writing.
Yes. Yeah, and the thing is, we don't really need GI Joe. We don't really need, Cobra. I mean, there's only one representative of both
Each.
of them. They're both women. We
Hmm.
also have like Akiko, so it's like, oh, okay, you've got, you know, like, they're clearly feel guilty that the primary two characters are men,
Yeah.
so all the other principals are women.
Yeah.
And so that's fine. I mean, like I like actually the three women characters are the characters I like the most.
Mm.
But but you don't need like J. Joe, Cobra. You need somebody, but it doesn't need to be the Yakuza, right? You need some element to be your primary antagonist. Then you have this like MacGuffin, Firestone thing that is
Ugh.
introduced. I mean, the secret room, the secret building that is kept in looks cool, but you don't need a MacGuffin, right? I mean, then you start. It's like when you start pulling at threads of the plot, and you realize what is essential to this plot.
Mm.
This plot is just a series of unessential elements with no movie there, and the essence of the movie is just messed up guy goes to Japan and finds his identity with the Rashikaje. Fine, make that movie. Why is it filled with all of these other things, none of which work?
Well, if this was supposed to be a trilogy, right? The problem with this being allegedly part of a trilogy, it ends on a cliffhanger, sort of fine, but this feels a lot like the Dark Universe's The Mummy with Tom Cruise, where there was a lot of talk of this is a part of a wider franchise. We're doing the Dark Universe. We've now sort of cast the Invisible Man, and we've cast, Bride of Frankenstein, and we've done this. And here's Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, and we're going to take photos of them and all sorts of stuff. And then you watch The Mummy, and you go, "There's clearly no plan beyond this. Like, there's ideas." Like, you've introduced a secret organization that sits behind it all. All right, fine. There's ideas, but you've not you clearly don't have a grander plan. You are putting this out to test the waters. In fact, I would actually, in fact, it'd be interesting. I might even watch it. I'm going to put myself through it. I would even suggest that Snake Eyes or GI Joe Origins and The Mummy are pretty much the same film in many respects, for they're doing the same purpose. In that we're looking to start a franchise, but we're not convinced enough of what we've got to go all in on anything bigger than a single film based around what we consider to be our biggest character or biggest star. I think that's what this is, and it's just it becomes so new to, like, tell me what was chapter 2 and chapter 3 going to be then? What was the point? What were they going to get to? Like, was the end going to be a big showdown between Storm Shadow and whatever, or is it like, does it lead into like a big GI Joe movie? Are you going to have it connected to anything else? Like, what is the plan here? You clearly don't know.
No. Yeah, I agree. But the other thing is, I mean, and I haven't seen that Mummy movie, but
Don't.
yeah, I'm not rushing. But the other thing is, these movies have to be good.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like, stop making franchises before you've made a single good movie.
Yes.
Like, make a good movie and then say, oh, people love this. It made a little bit of money. Maybe we could do 2 sequels to it instead of 1, and have a spin-off character and start building a universe or something. Okay, that sort of works, right? But don't do a movie that's intended to build the franchise that actually sucks, and it tries to be all things to all people, and bring in a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's an espionage movie, it's a martial arts movie, it's G.I. Joe, it's Cobra, it's Yakuza, it's spiritual, it's fantasy. Stop doing all of these things. My version of this movie is a $10 million movie. First of all, this movie has no stars.
No.
At least The Mummy has Tom Cruise, right?
Yes.
True.
True.
I mean, not that that's much of a bonus, but at least it can open a movie in theory. But who was going to sell this movie? I don't know. I mean, my version of this movie is the Japanese version of this movie that cost $10 million to make max. It's just shot within an inch of its life, beautiful beyond belief. and everybody says that's actually a really amazing movie, and it doesn't have to make a lot of money, but it sets a solid fucking foundation for like, oh, I really care about those characters, and it doesn't need to make more than 50 million at the box office to justify itself. And in 2 years, you can use that character in something a little bigger. Um, but this movie is just, it's going. Who thought this was going to make money?
I
I
don't
mean,
know. Henry Golding. He took the main lead. I don't know. I mean, I'm just looking. The budget for this was an estimated 88 million, which,
mhm.
for you and I, this is what we're saying. I'm appreciative of that budget. Well done. That's less than 100 million. You're not going insane. However, like you say, you still need something. I watched the trailer back for this
Mhm.
earlier on because I watched the film. I was like, how did they sell this? The trailer amazingly starts. The first shot of the trailer is the final shot of the film. Because they're like, oh, we need to
Yeah.
show that he's Snake Eyes. And you're like, what? Oh, yeah, yeah, we need to show that this is about Snake Eyes. And you go, cool. That's the last shot of the film. And then the rest of the film is kind of like all the sort of the lot of it is like distant shots of people on motorbikes and then fighting. They are trying so hard to hide the fact that he's not Snake Eyes in this film. And then they'll have like Henry Golding doing scenes, and you go, oh no, it's an origin film. It's an origin film. But you are it works incredibly hard to try and convince you that he is wearing that Snake Eyes outfit in this film.
Mhm.
So even the people advertising this film were like, "Oh, we have a problem because it's called Snake Eyes and it's basically sort of like Henry Golding, who up until this point has done very little
Yeah.
and is not known as a an action star or anything in this. This isn't trying to sell it.
Certainly not a box office draw.
No, yeah. So it's just an odd setup. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's one of those where I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. It's um,
It is kind of mind-boggling. Again, it's not a bad movie exactly.
no,
It's not good. I mean, it's got some poor choices, but like you said, I mean, like the action sequences are good. I mean, like
mm,
that whole action sequence with the car carrier and stuff, and
mm.
like that's pretty good. There are a bunch of like motorcycle stunts stuff that are fine. I mean, you know, um, I like the Ninja Clan stuff for the most part. I mean, but it's just kind of like it's all forgettable. And what was the point of making this? Um, I don't know. It's kind of, I mean, like you were talking about that trailer, and I remember those trailers, as a G.I. Joe fan.
Mm.
I mean, even I thought this was mind-boggling. It's sort of like, hey, remember those two G.I. Joe movies we made? Did you think they were fun? Um, we took all of the fun away from that, but we want to hide that from you in the trailer. Like, but don't worry, there will be some action scenes because we know that's all that you came to see anyway, right? I mean, I don't know. The decisions of any of these franchises sort of boggle me, the lack of continuity in Transformers, the decision to reboot and then, not have any continuity even in that. I mean,
Mm.
why do you make three Spider-Man movies and then reboot, make two of them, set up a larger franchise, and then reboot again? Who gives a shit? I mean, um, you make two G.I. Joe movies that are kind of, you know, middling, and then you reboot, but you do this. I mean, who can fathom, the mind of Hollywood at this point?
Well, I think the the problem is, and we've said about this before, is that you used the word there, franchise. That's what the target is. That's what the aim is. That's the end goal, isn't it? Like, oh, how do we get a shared universe out of this? How is it that we can bang out 3 movies a year in this, and it's going to make us $1 billion? Like, that's the dream, isn't it? This is the Marvel dream. Like, Marvel whether you like them or not, and I know you sort of, you and I have some different opinions on some of those films, but it's funny, I watched um, Captain America: The First Avenger recently, and I watched that, and I was like, knowing that this leads into the Avengers, but I was watching it like, actually, I kind of really like this film. It's a fun origin film. Like, it's well cast. Like, Chris Evans wasn't a big star really at the time. This is what sort of made him. It's got a load of people, it hasn't got any, Stanley Tucci's in it, but he's a character actor. Like, weird enough, Hugo Weaving, Samara Weaving's dad's in it as the Red Skull. But again, like, he was known for a couple of things, but wasn't really a star. Like, it was no real draw.
Mhm.
But when you watch it, like, it knows what it wants to do. It knows the story it's telling. It's a pretty well structured film in that it's sort of like, we're going to introduce Skinny Steve, then we're going to build him up to become Super Steve, and then we're going to have the Captain America stuff. Like, it has a pretty clear structure. And I was watching it going like, this is exactly as you said. Like, if you took this out and just watched this as a film on its own, it's good. It works. It's fine. Like, it leads into, there's a bit of a cliffhanger.
Yeah, you
at
say
the
like
end.
this is a B. This is like kind of
Yeah.
like it's not. No, nobody's going to think it's great, but it's
No, but it's
if it were like a forgotten movie from the 80s or something, you'd be like, no, this deserves more attention. This,
yeah,
you know,
exactly. That's the kind of
I
thing.
mean,
Like, it's on par with like The Rocketeer, where I watch it and I'm like, oh, I
yeah,
enjoy this film. It's Joe Johnston again. I'm like, this is good fun. I like it, and I'm having it. But like, it knows what it's doing in the fact that, like, again, there was a plan where they're like, oh, you are a cog in this wider piece, but you don't have to do like, you know,
right.
you just do this bit, and this is the piece. This, that's going to lead us into the wider thing. That's all we
You
need
don't
to worry
need
about.
a time traveling Thanos to show up in the middle of it,
Exactly.
and Captain Marvel, who we haven't written her movie yet, is going to be there fighting him. And that's
Yeah.
just going to be a cameo in the middle of this,
Yeah.
stupid Captain America movie,
Yeah. That's it. Like, you just need to have that bit, and it will lead
Yeah.
into. And so I was watching it
Well,
thinking,
this is like lay the foundations,
yes.
right? I mean, it's just to do things in fucking order. You
Mm,
just need to make a good Snake Eyes origin movie. If that's your fucking goal, just show a messed up Snake Eyes goes to Japan with his buddy Tommy, for whatever reason, get him into that ninja clan and show, that's the end of Act One.
yeah.
And I'll tell you, I hate the first Avenger. I mean, I think like by the end, like I think it starts as a really good movie, and by the end, it's like every 15 minutes it loses a plus or a minus. It's like every 15 minutes it is like just I'm groaning more and more and
I will
more until
defend
by
that.
the
I
end
will
I
defend
hate
that film to the hilt.
the
I kind of,
ending.
I
Is one
kind
of
of
the
love that
worst
film.
endings in movie history as far as its
Mm-mm.
climax.
I won't
It-
hear it. I won't hear it. Anyway,
well, I
carry
mean,
on.
Bucky, commits suicide, and
Yeah.
there is the whole suicide thing, but but like again, like at least it's trying to be classically structured, right?
Mm,
So like end of your first act is Snake Eyes goes to join the Arashikaga clan. You have a long second act with that's all about him adapting to Japan and going through the training and everything at the same time that you're building up, some villain. And then act three is he gets the suit and he's fighting the villain, and they defeat the villain, but Snake Eyes is,
injured.
but Storm Shadow is on the Snake
Mm,
Eyes is injured, and Storm Shadow is on the outs, and so it's a sort of Pyrrhic victory where they've defeated the villain but lost the head of their clan or whatever, and Storm Shadow is looking for refuge. And where does he go? Post credit sequence. Guy in a like, thank you, Storm Shadow. You ban up and it's a guy in a Cobra Commander
okay. Yeah.
mask.
Yeah.
Yeah, bam, fucking great movie. $20 million, amazing fucking origin movie, and you've done what Marvel did well,
Mm,
admittedly, which is just lay the foundations a stone at a time.
yeah. Well, the thing is, one of the things that's funny is this is a separate universe, but you need to have watched GI Joe Rise of Cobra in order to understand this film.
Now, to be honest, you need to have watched Ang Lee's Hulk to understand the Marvel Cinematic
No,
Universe hook.
and
I
I
mean,
agree with that. I agree.
yeah.
That's also a bit of a problem. But the fact that like this is a complete like you need to have watched because it sort of goes here's Scarlet and you go cool, and she's one of the Joes and you go cool, and they
Who's
explain
that?
it. But you go like I don't know why I thought she should be. Is she important? Like, if you came to this with no knowledge of anything about GI Joe and you just watch this
Mhm.
film, firstly the film's probably slightly better because you just like I'm coming in with no expectations. But also, like, they just sort of, they tell you that the Baroness and Scarlet are important, and you go, okay.
Right.
But the only reason I know they're really important is because I've seen the one with Sienna Miller and the other thing, and I'm going, like, cool, all right, I get why they're important. Other than that, like, but the Baroness running off at the end, where she's like, oh fuck this, and runs off,
Mhm.
should be like a, like there should be like a final confrontation between Scarlet and Baroness where there's a bit of a there's some bitchiness, but it should really come down to like she makes a choice to leave her behind or something, but she's like, oh, just fuck this, I'm off. It's kind of like this, I'm just like, oh, the only reason I know that she's badass really is because I've seen her in other films. Like she's
Yeah.
fine in this, but they are so carrying certain things from other films that it's so weird.
Well, the other thing is, I agree with you, and this is why I think like you could just cut them from the movie. I mean,
Yeah.
they're there to set up sequels that we don't get, right?
No.
Stop setting up sequels, lay the foundations. But the other thing is like you have a mystical stone that shoots fire
Mm-hmm.
and kind of gives the person holding it telekinetic abilities. I mean, fire starting abilities. I mean, it's not super clear. We don't know. I mean, I will say this, at least like the endless Marvel MacGuffins and Transformers MacGuffins, like there's a line or two of dialogue explaining why they exist, right? This is just kind of like, oh yeah, it's here. That we have that
We
Mind
have
Stone, and
yeah, we have
uh,
Japanese mysticism to explain this. Move on. That's it.
then you've got these giant snakes that can sense good and evil.
Uh,
So like you're willing to go outre and weird and break, So like you mean to tell me you couldn't have the Baroness like lifted out of the clans by a Fang helicopter as she cackles, and says like better luck next time, Joes, and
yeah.
like oh my God, I would love that. At least give me that. Instead, she just disappears. It's like this movie is so determined in its sense of realism and sort of like Casino Royale, James Bond, realism
Mm-hmm.
to deprive you of any fun, of any of the fun of the first two movies, on any of the points where it should be giving you fun. And then all of the points where you don't want it to go weird, it goes weird and damages its, like, but we can't give you what you want. Isn't that it's kind of mind-boggling?
Yeah, no, it is. This is one of those scripts that you sort of think everyone's read this. This has gone through this has gone through multiple hands, and this is what has reached the screen. That kind of like you look at it, and I looked at the screenwriters. And I was like, okay, well, what else have they done? And I don't like to. No, I am going to speak ill of them because it's kind of embarrassing. But you look at them and you go, okay, what is it? What else have you done? And I'll go through some of the top. There's an Evan Spilotopoulos, and you go, right, he did a film called The Unholy, which was all right. Charlie's Angels, the 2019 version that died a death because that was incomprehensible. The Huntsman sequel, so not even the original Huntsman that was the Snow White kind of deal.
Yeah.
The Pope's Exorcist, um, uh, apparently Beauty and the Beast, and then he's done like Hercules, the Rock version of Hercules, which was also pretty
I don't
atrocious.
think I've ever seen any of these movies.
No, exactly, and it's just a bunch of other like weird stuff that like you've never sort of heard on. Sharpnel, again, loads. The Grey Man is probably done, but like additional literary material is noted. It's barely done anything. Like there's nothing on here. Script revisions on Captain Marvel. That's not really something you want to be writing home about.
No.
Anna Waterhouse, again, exactly the same as this other guy. Like they're clearly like a writing team, but it's just like you look at their filmography and you're sort of going, yeah, you're not you're not winning me over with what you've done before. Like, there's nothing here that's going, yeah, you're the people to write this Japanese-based action ninja film.
Yeah.
And it kind of shows on screen that they just went, this is the idea, this is the idea, this is the idea. And you're like, yeah, there's nothing here. There's nothing here that sort of tells me this is a coherent script. And the fact that it's got through so many people and people like turned up on set and were like, yeah, I'm willing to do this is kind of baffling. I know there's other films that are crap. I get that. I know there are many films we've done that we've gone, this is a bad film.
Yeah.
But this is one of those things where it's like, it's so blatantly obvious from like set piece to set piece that you just go, this doesn't gel with the thing that just happened in the last scene. Like, this doesn't
Yes.
work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no connective tissue. Especially early on. I mean,
Mm,
um, yeah, but I mean, it does get better as it goes. But you're right. I mean, it's sort of mind-boggling. It's incomprehensible, some of these choices, and I don't understand why. Like, you know, get look, Warren Ellis, who, obviously you don't hire today for very good reason, right?
mm-hmm,
But I mean, Warren Ellis wrote the G.I. Joe Resolute,
mm.
short that we covered, which did a decent job of Snake Eyes origins, right? Like, you know,
Yeah.
how about Larry Hama? Can you imagine? Can you
The guy that did it.
we're
Yeah.
gonna do the Snake Eyes origin? We got Larry Hama along with somebody. Let's bring in some Hollywood, guy who knows how to do a script, and the two of them are gonna collaborate, like bingo. I mean, you
Mm.
want to talk about like returning G.I. Joe to its roots, doing it right, get some fan cred. We got Larry Hama to fucking write this. And by the way, he doesn't get royalties, understandably, because he was, writing under
Under
contract,
contract. Yeah.
but work for hire. But hey, you made Snake, and literally that two-parter Snake Eyes the Origin that established all of this in the comics. Like, you're gonna get $500,000 for writing the screenplay, right?
Yeah.
Like, if nothing else, we gave Larry Hama $500,000 for, hey, that was a fucking success in my film. I mean, why would you not do that? There are so many obvious. I mean, get the guy who wrote the Wolverine to work
Mm.
with Larry Hama, and bang out a movie. I don't understand this. But the important thing is that you know, people like I mean, this isn't even like Kurtzman, doing
Mm.
Star Trek Into Darkness and finding work again. I mean, this is like a guys who never did anything. It was amazing.
No, I think it's just so, yeah, you're right. It is. It's sort of like, it's, script for hire, isn't it? It feels like that kind of thrown together and sort of like, oh, we're doing this, but without a plan. Like, I kind of blame the script writers, but also, like, if it was, did they like, if you've got like what, MGM, Paramount, Hasbro involved in all this, like, did they turn up to an office and be like, okay, what's your plan, big guys, big production studios? What is it you want? And we're like, oh, we want a Snake Eyes film. It might be a trilogy, but it's got to be it's got to be an origin story. We want this in it. We want that in it. Here's all the notes. It's got to have big snakes. It's got to end in a big fight. Go away and make it up. And you're like, oh, but we also want it to compare to blah 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 blah. Like, it's clearly that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's just a mishmash of ideas that they've clearly gone, okay, we've got to build all this crap into a single script. That's how it's going to work, with no thought of what's going to happen. If this is a trilogy, what's happening in part two and part three? Like, they'll be like, oh, we'll pick that up later. I'm looking at the same period. I'm just scanning through some of the films that sort of came out around this time. And you've got things like there was a Mortal Kombat
Hmm.
reboot, which is, I would say, is actually better than this, but has a similar problem where they go like, we kind of want to sort of lean into it all, but we've got to provide all this sort of like backstory. It's got to be more mystic in this sort of thing, so it's got to be darker. So we're actually going to invent a new character to be our entry point, and you kind of, what? Why does that need to happen? Like Cole Young? No, no, no. We've seen this work in the 1995 version. That's what these other characters are for. Like, and then they did it with like, but then like Sony's been doing this thing with like Morbius and Venom
Yeah.
and Madam Web, where like it's so incoherently put together. Like you said, like franchises don't seem. Bloodshot was done in 2020 with bloody
Mm.
Vin Diesel, and I've read some
That was
Bloodshot.
supposed to be the start of another
That was meant to be the
shared
Valiant
universe.
universe was going to
Yeah,
start, and that was such a piss poor film, that isn't it? Which is a
I
real shame
never
because
saw it.
again don't, but the Valiant comics are good, and so it's
I
another one
know,
where
I
you go
know.
like,
I wanted that universe to succeed, damn it. But I also saw what they were doing and was going like, I'm not going to see that in theaters. I want nothing
yeah,
to do with this, right?
yeah,
Um,
no, I
no,
didn't.
I agree.
It's
Like Valiant should have, a lot more success.
all of this tells me, right? All of this, including Snake Eyes film, and I think you've put it in sort of about building those foundation pieces. Nobody wants to put the work in. Everyone wants the quick, the shortcut to the Avengers $1 billion franchise.
Yes.
That's all they want. And I think we saw this with the DCEU. We've seen it with this. Now
Mhm.
everyone wants to jump straight to the big one, and you go, oh, you don't need to do that. You need to build up to that, And I think that's the problem. Everyone's going like, right, let's throw Venom in a film. We can't have Spider-Man, but we can do Venom. And you go, we don't really need to be good films because we've got Tom Hardy and we've got a Venom in it. You go, okay, cool. We're gonna do a vampire film with with um your Joker guy in it. Like again, it's just there's so little
Yeah.
thought in these. Oh, they all share the same universe. Do they? Do they? What's the point then?
No.
Because you've
Yeah.
now
I
sort of
mean,
ended your Venom universe, and like they literally just released Craven the Hunter this
yes.
week. I mean, we are recording when this happens just before Christmas. They've released Craven the Hunter, and Sony have sort of gone, yeah, that's the end of what we're doing. Like
Uh-huh.
clearly acknowledging that we're shitting out another film that nobody cares about. Don't worry, you won't get any more.
Well, it's like Blue Beetle and Aquaman, where it's just like,
Yeah,
like, I mean, I mean, we're now at the point where $200 million movies are being released
to go
and
nowhere.
bombing because, part of how they're sold is this was the tail end of an attempt at a franchise which we don't
Yeah.
believe in anymore and we have already abandoned. I mean, I mean, it's the money that is most offensive here. And look, and I take it as kind of axiomatic that most people working on movies do not. I mean, look, we've trashed this movie and especially the screenwriting, but I mean, I take it as axiomatic that most people working on movies do not intend to make bad movies.
Yes.
And as you say, probably like Baroness and Scarlet were forced on, this
Yeah.
movie, this movie was sold under certain parameters. Everybody's doing the best they can. Maybe they're not the best writer in the world, but that's fine. I don't mean to shit on everything,
Mm-hmm.
but um, but it's the money that is offensive here.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing all of this and you're doing it at a budget of $4 million, this is a charming movie at $4 million. This is impressive if they can pull off half of these stunts and stuff at $4 million, right? I mean,
Mm.
we would love this movie at $4 million. This would be the indie movie that could. That yeah, it's bad, it's got issues, but it's kind of interesting. It's pretty impressive at 4 million. It is not impressive at 80 something. It
No.
is a catastrophe at 200.
Can I say to say this right? There is one. I'm going to call it a franchise. There is one franchise. In fact, it is a franchise because it had a spin-off. There is one franchise that accidentally has become incredibly popular,
Hmm.
and I think has managed to do something incredibly successful. It started with a film at a budget of 85,000. It put out a trailer, and it had a load of backlash. The people that made it heard the backlash, made changes, and came back and said, "We're actually going to put the film back 6 months. We're going to make changes, and here's the trailer again." It then went on to make $320 million worldwide on an 85 million budget. It was so successful that it reignited it, and a sequel was greenlit. The sequel came out shortly after, had a budget of 110 million, but made 410 million. And then now the third film's about to come out, and it's also had a spin-off sideshow on Paramount Plus. That's Sonic the Hedgehog.
Oh yeah.
Sonic came out and were like, we're just making this silly film with Jim Carrey. It's going to be kind of fun. Just go and enjoy it. And they go, everyone went, oh, the design of Sonic's awful. Oh, well, okay, we'll lean into what he looks like in the games, and we're going to have fun. And the film's like knows exactly what it is. It knows it's silly and it's fun. Jim Carrey's going like, I'm having a ball doing this because I'm, doing whatever I want to do, kind of thing. And somehow that film seemed to establish like it ends with a teaser of Tails, but not enough that they're going like, oh, we're definitely going to give you Tails. It's just kind of like a nice
Right.
little nod.
Yeah.
If that had ended and that was it, then people would have gone, that's a pretty decent Sonic film. That was all right. That was.
Yeah.
But it's built up that they were like, now we're going to do Knuckles. Now we're going to do, then they're introducing Shadow. I don't know enough about the Sonic universe to actually really know this stuff, but they're like, and we had a spin off on Paramount Plus.
Let's be clear. There's no Sonic universe any more than
all
there's
right.
a Super Mario Brothers
No,
universe.
but you know what I mean.
But
Like,
I know what you mean, right? Like their characters, Knuckles, and
but one of it's a bit like the Paddington films as well. Like the people involved in it are always kind of surprised that it does as well as it does, and they're grateful. Where they're going like, we always did this little film, and we're kind of happy with it. And then like you go, but we're going to do another one and another one. And I kind of feel like that's almost like the right attitude.
mm-hmm.
Where they go, oh, you can watch all of Paddington 1 or all of Sonic 1, but you can also come in and just watch Sonic 2 or Paddington 2. Like, you can watch those films and they work as an independent film. You don't need all this other stuff. Like, granted, these are kids' films. Like, I'm not.
Yeah.
But
I mean, look at all the horror franchises that started real cheap, expanded, whatever. I mean, Fast and the Furious, same thing. I mean, that was not built to be a franchise. I mean, if you wanted, you could do a Beetlejuice franchise, with lots of otherworldly characters, lots of different tones. I mean, there are lots of ways to build out, but you build out from a good, fun foundation,
yeah.
right? You have to win people over. You can't just, deliver, a corporate sanitized product that, and the thing is, this is trying to be a foundation stone, right? I mean, it's literally G.I. Joe Origins, right?
Yeah.
But even within that structure, because it's the Hollywood franchise model, they have to put the Baroness in there. They have to put the, um, Scarlet in there. They have to get to the end before it's Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes, right? I mean, it's, and then there's too much money. There's more money than common sense.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a huge problem.
It's the thing is, it does feel that's exactly what you're saying is exactly right. I think it's this studio thing, isn't it? It's like it is supposed to be a foundation stone. Everything we're talking about is supposed to be there. But the fact that it's structured in the way that it is, that it's not even like fan service. It doesn't even provide that fun and that thing of going like, it's a Snake Eyes film. We're just going to have Henry Golding. Well, we've paid for Henry Golding and he's a good looking guy. So we're going to have his face all over the place. I mean, this is Stallone and Dredd all over again, isn't it? This is like, we've paid for Sylvester Stallone. So he had to take his helmet off after like the first 10 minutes. And you go like, hey, what? It's the same sort of thing where like, you're right. Like this should really be hitting Snake Eyes Storm Shadow full costume by like, if this is a 2 hour film, by the hour mark. By 1 hour, they should be sort of getting at least a first draft before you get the full final iteration at the end of the film for the final act. Like, because you're right, you can't watch this film in isolation. You cannot. Well, you have to because there's nothing else to watch. But like, this is it ends with him going like, "I will go and bring Tommy back," and you're going, "Cool, what? I don't know why are you." And then he kicks up.
Where's
like,
that adventure?
But more importantly, like, but why are you now putting on a Snake Eyes costume? What's that got to do with you going to find Tommy? Like, there's no purpose for you having this. This isn't like Batman suiting up or like any other superhero suiting up. It's just all of a sudden you've got this cool visor thing that comes over your face. What's going on?
Where was that sitting around in the Rashkaje? Yeah, why are they giving it to you now?
Exactly.
I mean, they gave you a sword, and then you betrayed them. Like why do they have this motorcycle suit? Like
I don't know. This is that thing, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. That's the biggest problem with this film. Everything is, and then this happens, and that's the problem. Like nothing is.
Well, I mean, right down to win at the end. The grandmother who leads the clan, who I kind of like, says, Tommy, you'll never succeed me, and she's right to do so, right? Because he's betrayed the clan's oath to never
Never
use the
used the
stone. I mean,
yeah.
okay, I say right to do so, but there shouldn't be a stone. There shouldn't, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, all of which conceded. But
Mm-hmm.
okay, this makes sense. Why does he leave?
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many, just like, I mean, even just basic character motivations are not clear. Like,
Well,
he leaves and says, okay, enough with he says, like, I've given my life to this clan, you know? I mean, like, okay, but like, so why is this the sticking point? Like,
well, surely he should, like, if because he's been all about honor. We've shown him to be quite a good guy
right,
throughout, predominantly. So it should be, I have dishonored the clan, but I will prove to you that I am. It's the opposite. It should be like, I will prove to you that I am honourable and deserving of following your footsteps. So I shall be as
Mhm.
good as possible, and I shall now be serving the clan in the best possible way. And you're going like, no, not having a fucking tantrum and going off to join Cobra. Like, this
Yes.
makes no sense.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so unmotivated and
Yeah,
doesn't work in the moment.
no,
I mean, it just doesn't even work as you're watching it. I
because
mean,
this film is all about, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this
yes,
happens. Because it's got to.
right, because it's just moving the cardboard characters on the
Mm.
chessboard. Keep in mind the original version of this is he's framed for the murder of the leader of the clan, right?
Yeah,
Like that's a good reason to flee for your life and not be welcome back. I mean, how is just this? You're right. This is just a tantrum,
yeah.
but it's unmotivated. Nobody ever says the basic thing like, well, if you're so concerned for the clan, like why, you accept that you have, violated your promise, your oath, right? If you're so concerned with the clan, stay here and help me rebuild it, right?
Mm.
Nobody even says that, right? Because that would get in the way of the tantrum
Yeah.
of moving the chess piece around. I mean, so right, you're right. I mean, it's just one thing happens after another. Um,
It's almost as
what's
well
the
like
point?
the prequel that has offended me the most of all these things has always been Solo, a Star Wars story, because it kind of does it
I,
does
I don't think I'm a defender of Solo.
well. I do recognize actually that this is kind of a prequel, but not a prequel kind of thing. So, but Solo does too much to try and answer too many questions. It's sort of like to the extent of going like, this is how
Yeah,
he got his name from a a guard, like a immigration guard, which is like, I hate that moment
I love it.
endlessly.
I think it's good.
But at least
I'm
it
the
makes
only I know I'm the only human on the planet who thinks
no.
that's good, but
But I will say, at least they're making a joke of it. Like they do go, it's a passing comment. Like, oh, he got his name because of this. It's silly, but like, fine. But the
well,
fact
it's a
that,
passing comment, but it also underlines like his fundamental loneliness.
yeah, which is
Yeah.
fine. But like the fact that that film goes right. Here's how. I'll give
You
you an
got the
example.
Millennium Falcon,
He gets the
right.
Wookiee. He gets the gun. He gets
Yes.
the so on and so
He
forth.
does
Right.
the Kessel Run, which is pretty stupid. Yeah.
The only one that kind of, and I know I'm a hypocrite. I've acknowledged this on numerous occasions. I am a hypocrite, so I will concede that. But the problem with that film is it kind of like, it's not a bad film. I will accept Solo's not actually a bad film. It's kind of a fun adventure film, so I will acknowledge it from that point of view. That like, aside from being a prequel, there's parts of that film I actually really enjoy.
It does have a rocky start, I will
It
concede. It
does,
gets better.
yes,
Yeah, it gets
gets a lot
better.
better, and it's actually kind of fun. And I think the guy who plays the young Solo is actually very good. And the guy who plays a young Lando Calrissian, like again, I forget the
Oh
other, but
yeah.
like excellent. So I think
Yeah,
so
he's
not a
great.
bad. It's not particularly a bad film. It just does these things where it's sort of like, and here's the gun, and you're like, why does he need to have a gun that he then holds on to for like, oh, because that's the gun he shoots Greedo with, and you're like, I don't need to know this shit. Like, this is
Not
unimportant.
important. Yeah. I agree.
But what it does is, what Solo does, it focuses on the minutia and gives you all these bits and pieces. Where like Snake Eyes is going sort of like, oh, we're not even going to tell you anything. We're going to tell you the big stuff, but then like the connective tissue of like how he gets the suit, stuff like unimportant. You go,
Oh,
no, that's no, that's just I want a balance between the two. Like I need somewhere in between Solo and Snake Eyes to give me that sort of realistic kind of like balance. But the fact that like it's not doing that is so bizarre.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
I know what you're saying about the minutia. I mean, I guess that that I will settle for, whether a movie gives us the minutia or not. I mean, that's interesting from a kind of like continuity standpoint, right? I
Hmm.
mean, that's interesting from a fanboy standpoint,
Yeah.
right? I can put on that hat. However, and this is like going back to the franchise discussion, right? That fanboy continuity hat is the franchise hat, right? It's
Yes.
like, oh, that's Scarlet. We're going to return the Baroness to her roots and set up the next one. I no, 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 no. That's a different hat. The main hat you have to wear is just the heart and soul of a movie.
Yes. Now,
Is this a good movie in its own right? Do I care about the characters? Does this performance sell it? And too many movies, whether they're putting on the franchise hat or the minutia, fanboy hat, if that I don't care what, that hat's there, that's fine. That's great, right? You got to wear two hats sometimes, setting up a movie. That's fine. But the main hat you always have to wear, right? Put on your goddamn Steven Spielberg hat and fucking tell me a story about a
right.
character who I can identify with.
Okay, now I want to. I'm so glad you said Steven Spielberg because I'm now going to acknowledge. I've acknowledged my hypocrisy. Now I'm going to explain my hypocrisy. All right, because the Solo infuriates me for many reasons. I acknowledge it's not a bad. It's not actually a bad film. All right,
Mm-hmm.
but one of my favorite films of all time, is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. The first 20 minutes of that film, or 15 minutes, is a compressed origin story for Indiana Jones, in which we find out how he got his hat, how he got his scar on his lip, how he got his fear of snakes, how he got, how he's named after the dog. And it,
Yeah.
but, and so I acknowledge, and I love that film, I adore that film, but I acknowledge that I think Spielberg is kind of responsible for the prequels
Mm-hmm.
of the future. But as you say, everything that is then in that start of that film, there's information in that start that not only is it important for he's like, oh, we're going to show all this other stuff of how he got this, which it does infuriate me at times when I watch it back, but it also acknowledges the relationship with his dad. It also acknowledges his sort of how he was a hothead and all this other stuff, and that is him as an adult. And then you get the film Last Crusade, which I adore and is is my favorite Indiana Jones film, fantastic adventure film, which is exactly as you're saying. Give me a good film that goes from beginning to end. And by the end of that film, you have the reconciliation of father and son. You've had the adventure of the Holy Grail and all that sort of stuff. The Nazis are defeated, so on and so forth. And they ride off into the sunset, and you're like, "Fuck me, this has been literally from your origin to the end, and that's it."
Yeah.
And it's perfect in that sense. That's what you need to be able to do. And what Snake Eyes does, it kind of does that first bit and then stops at what would have been the first act of a Spielberg film and says you've got to wait for the rest. And you're like, I don't want to wait. I actually want the good film to come.
Right.
So yeah.
Well, and I often think of Spielberg as, just sort of the master of selling the moment, right? And selling the character. And I don't think anyone thinks he's the best director that ever lived.
No.
I don't think that, he's the best writer. I don't think that he's, the best at anything except he is masterful at selling the character, at making you identify with the character and the character situation and pulling you into the movie. And that is so much of what, is the difference between a good movie and a bad movie. There are movies that are brilliantly written, brilliantly acted, that just you never get involved with. And they could be directed brilliantly, written brilliantly. They did everything right, but they just don't quite work on screen. Spielberg will take a script that is a half-ass script, he will work with a half-ass actor who was a problem through the whole thing, and he will somehow turn it into movie gold because he is so focused on getting that shot that will work for you, the audience. And this is part of, whether you want to think of it as like audience focused. Yeah, I mean, you can think of it as like, you can deride this as being saccharine or giving the audience what the audience wants if you want. But, it's really about fundamentally, recognizing that cinema is a medium that is a visual medium in which you don't control the pace. and you have to have the audience go along with the ride. The audience has to buy the totally look. Cinema is as artificial as opera or anything else, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the idea of like you have cuts between scenes and people are just going to be like, oh yeah, that's the same scene, it's not 1,000 years later. That is so weird,
Yeah.
right? Like it is so bizarre that we follow shit.
I think when you're right about something, I think, and it comes
But
this
focus
film.
on the audience is
Yeah.
what I'm
Oh
saying.
no,
Like
I agree.
think of the audience.
I think again, we've said about this film being, and then this, and then this, and then this. That first half an hour, that first act of this film is basically almost like a montage of stuff going on, right? And one of the things you say, I mentioned sort of like Last Crusade, but also I recently watched. There are two films where I think you and I have talked about briefly. Like, we will talk about more in the future at some point on Stories That Time and Space, where I think like the pacing exactly as it does what you want. It knows it's like you can't spend too much time with this. We've got to move on. We've got to do it in the right way. Jurassic Park does this, where it's like it holds off for the longest time possible, and it's the extent that one of the characters is even sort of joking at you. Like you don't see a dinosaur in that film for like 45 minutes. Really, you see glimpses and bits and pieces. And then you actually have Jeff Goldblum's character going like, you're going to have dinosaurs, on your dinosaur tour. And the audience going, yeah, you're going to have dinosaurs in your dinosaur film, aren't you? Like, we're going to see this shit. And the answer is, oh yeah, at the hour mark, you're going to get the T-Rex attack.
Yeah.
And you get the massive payoff. And obviously that's like the turning of the film. Like, that's it then. And you're off to the races. And that's what Spielberg does. He's going to constantly, but the rest, that first hour is still good because you're going to you got a really good conversation, about the ethics of the whole thing, and you meet the characters. The characters are engaging, as you say, good stuff. Back to the Future is the other one for me, where I think I think Zemeckis is a bit of a mess as of a director, especially of late. Like I don't think he's done anything good since probably the sort of 90s. But Back to the Future does this thing where it's like, right, we know we've got to get back to the past. We've got to do this. And also, hanging around in the 80s isn't that exciting. But we need to introduce these characters. Here's how we're going to do it. And we're going to move on at such a sort of pace.
Yes.
And it moves and it sort of keeps picking up and it keeps, it adds things, it does things, in such a way. But the characters are, iconic in that way.
Back to the Future is a great example because whereas I think like Jurassic Park is ultimately sort of trivial in what it's depicting, and I mean it's schlocky, but it is acted and directed within an inch of its life, and it's masterfully done on every level imaginable. Back to the Future is fascinating because it is not a great script. It is not a great acting performance by anyone, and yet every scene in it works. And it's exactly what you're saying. Like it is so well paced. There are lines of dialogue that don't really make any sense. Characters are doing things that don't make sense. And you never notice or care because it all works minute by minute. It's firing on such a high degree that you never stop to say, wait a minute, none of this makes any sense at all.
Yeah.
And it's a masterpiece. I mean, it's a great, fun movie, and it has no right to be. Right?
No, I agree. It's
right.
I love that film, and I think
yeah, I do too.
I think it's one of those. But like that's when I'm looking at this cadre of shitty sort of franchise starter films, and they're all kind of like they're just crapped out in that same way. Like there's no sense of this being like oh, we're gonna make. As you said, like Back to the Future. I mean, that started a trilogy, right?
Right.
And I would say I have wavering. I love the whole thing as a piece.
I do too.
But I think there are it's peaks and troughs to it throughout. But I think generally it works overall, and I love that trilogy. Jurassic Park kicked off a massive franchise. Again, I think there are peaks and troughs, but I love the whole.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the whole franchise. But at least with that, like it never goes. Like, oh, we need to do this, and like it knows. Back to the Future actually is a thing. Actually works incredibly well because once it's established that first film, it goes, oh, everyone's watched that first film, so we can kind of play with it. So with 2, we're going to have Biff in different eras. We're going to have the whole under the sea dance from a different angle, and you're going to see this and you're going to see that. Like
the callbacks are just delightful.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
they work. But
Yeah.
because you've put the foundation stones places, it's almost like
Mhm.
I could imagine, like, they're going like, for the first franchise film, I want to show this end scene, but from two different pieces. Like, it's almost like it's kind of like almost like what a Deadpool would do to take the piss. Would be like, we're going to do a under the sea
Mm.
dance in one film. I'm going to show the opening scene in the last scene. All in, like, it's kind of like, oh, he wanted the whole trilogy in one film, and you can like, you can't do that. That's not how this works. Um, yeah, they just seem to have that sense of making a good film in the right way. And that's not to say there weren't failures in the 80s and 90s. There were. But there is this
Sure.
thing of like, we're making a good film, and if that works, we will carry on. But the eye wasn't on the franchise. It wasn't on going like, oh, we need the merchandise machine that this will become, because that wasn't the objective. And that's kind of, I think, the problem is it's driven by the money men rather than the creative minds that are creating a good film.
Well, you look at like the Chris Nolan Batman movies, which
Mm.
are, a mixed bag. I mean, I think that
Mm.
third one is a disaster.
I agree.
Uh, but each one of those was made with no thought to the sequels.
Mm.
Each one of those was made as, like leaving open the possibility of a sequel, but, leaving everything on the field on the one that they were shooting.
Yeah.
And they had, I mean, and look, I mean, as much as I think that that third one sort of is a disaster, um, there's not a sign of studio interference. They are doing what they want to do. They are selling those characters as best as, typically emotionless Nolan is capable of selling them. But, and those are great movies. But those were not made with a franchise in mind, right? I mean, Batman, the irony is like, people imitate Batman Begins over and over and over again as sort of like the return to basics, telling
Mhm.
telling the first movie. But the whole thing is you could stop at the end of Batman Begins
Oh,
and
and
it would
yeah.
be a solid Batman movie. It
Mm.
doesn't need another movie.
Mm-mm.
Um, and I don't understand how that
Well,
isn't taken for granted. And
but
for
even
me, like
Star
if
Wars, even can we say even Star
yes,
Wars, A New Hope, like it wasn't called
yeah,
episode 4 A New Hope when it was released. It was
hmm
called Star Wars. And the intention was that like if yeah, if it made money, there would be more made. But again, like
right,
if Return of the Jedi, or if Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi never made,
hmm
right? It's still that
people
first
would still be
film.
watching Star Wars.
Yeah, it still
Yeah,
works as a sort of a hero's
sure.
journey, and a sort of like it has that sort of thing. They defeat the Death Star, da 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 da. Like it all still works. It's a singular film that you
hmm
can watch. I just
Right.
yeah, I struggle with this thing of like, constantly leaning into that sort of need for what comes next.
So keep Spielberg in mind.
Hmm.
Keep this lesson of building the foundation correctly in mind. Your first act, your first 30-minute act is Snake Eyes meets Storm Shadow. Neither of them are called that. By the end of that act, Snake Eyes has lost everything, whether it's in Vietnam or you update it or whatever, and goes to, Japan.
Hmm.
You get to tell a 30-minute movie in a movie, right?
Mm.
I always think of like The Crying Game, which is really like three movies. That's a
Mm.
trilogy packed into one movie. It's three totally fucking different movies, right?
Yeah.
Um, but you tell a 30-minute movie that's just Snake Eyes loses fucking everything, right? But here's the key. By the end of that 30-minute movie, you have to really feel for Snake Eyes. Like that movie could do, I don't care whether it's in Vietnam, I don't care if it's set on a fucking space station. Your one job as a screenwriter or as a director is to make sure that at the end of those 30 minutes, I care about Snake Eyes and I am brokenhearted for where he's at emotionally at that point. And then he goes to Japan and we start this exploring, in Act Two, we start this exploring this new culture, this new life that he gets, and building up to the third act climax. You're one by 30 minutes in, I have to be invested in the main character. That is your
Hmm.
one fucking job, man. Like, I don't care if the Baroness is in there, I don't care if Scarlett's in there. I have to care about your fucking protagonist. And how is it that, I mean, that's the Spielberg thing, right? How is it
Mm.
that that has been lost? And what's left is moving the cardboard, little pieces, one thing
From
after another, you know,
from place to place. Yeah.
God. Yeah, it's infuriating. Um, and there's not that, and again, there's talent in this movie. There's
Oh
good
yeah.
stuff going on in this movie. This is not a bad movie. All we've done is trash it. It is not a bad movie. It is a misguided movie, to
Well,
say the least.
I
But
think
it's
I think
not bad.
no.
It's just flabbergasting.
I think it's one of the things that we've said before. There are two kinds of films. If, a terrible film, I will acknowledge is a terrible film, right? And you sort of go, yeah, it's confusing to why that's, or you can see it as an intentionally bad film, or like just a bad film, and that's infuriating. What's worse are boring films, which I think we've come across and gone like this is just boring, like there's no effort here. But the other ones that kind of infuriate me is missed potential. That when you do watch the film and you're going like, oh no, there's a glimmer. And I've said this kind of like with all the G.I. Joe films, so like the live action ones, I've gone, oh no, there's a glimmer of something great here. Like this could be like, Henry Golding isn't terrible. He kind of, he's fine. But the guy who plays Storm Shadow, whose name I forget how he's sort of, he's pretty good, and the setup and the Arashikage sort of setup, all good, fine. Like it looks good. I think the fighting, the martial art stuff is pretty good. Could be slightly better, but it's pretty good. It's all like it's like you said, there's elements here that I'm going like, it's not bad, it's not bad. Like it looks great. It's been filmed well in most places, but it's the script and the structure and the pacing where I'm looking at it and going like, but no one sat down and just went, this is the wider plan that we want to do, and as you say, we want to get to that, but what we've got to do is make a film that people can watch from beginning to end and are going to be satisfied and gets us to a place where we have these things in place. Like we've got to do this properly. And it just doesn't feel like those conversations happen. So I'm almost angry or I'm almost offended at
Yeah.
how sort of like this film comes together because you're like, this is just like, they're just shit out of film. Like, I think there's more attention paid to. I've watched like straight to video franchises that you go like, like the Death Race franchise with Jason Statham. You watch that and go, that has like more attention to its continuity and to like character base than this, and that's a real problem. So yeah, it's an
Yeah.
odd one. It's a real oddity.
Yeah. I mean, at the risk of repeating myself, I mean, it's like that focus on character. And I'm
Mm.
not the character guy. I'm the plot guy, right?
Mm.
I see character as a function of plot. But that doesn't mean that the plot doesn't have to reveal that character and make you care about that character in that situation. And that's how you launch franchises. All of my study of comic books and extended shared universes and comic books, which I spent my life studying, you know one of the lessons that I learned from it was that these characters are only as good as their best story.
Hmm.
You know, um, I mean, you could be publishing a character for 50 years, and if you haven't had any classic stories about them, they're irrelevant.
Mm.
Nobody cares, right? They might care enough to buy the next issue, but nobody remembers any of those stories. Most of those stories are going to go away, but there's going to be a handful of stories that stick in your mind, right? I
Mm.
mean, the reason why Dark Knight Returns sticks in our mind, yes, it was trailblazing, yes, but you feel for that old Bruce Wayne at the end of his life,
Yeah.
fighting for relevancy, fighting for a world that makes sense to him in a world that's gone crazy. I mean, you feel for that character in that situation. I mean, I again and again and again, I feel like this, whether it's a newer generation or it's just the way stories have gone, that it's become this cardboard setting. It's like, no, what was cool about that was Batman had some kicked ass. He was an old man kicking ass. And so we're gonna make
No, I think
a $200 million movie about an old man kicking ass
I
and
think
then wonder why did it not get love like Dark Knight?
I think this is one of those things where like we've sort of gone full circle where I think the people that like say comic writers know this stuff. Exactly what you've just said. A lot of them know this stuff, and they'll often try and write that definitive story. We talked about the definitive characters before of some of the GI Joe stuff. I think Batman's a good example. I think we've talked about this with other characters, like Scott. When Scott Snyder came along, he's like whether you love or hate his work with Greg Capullo, like he said in numerous times in interviews, he was like, I could have been canned after 12 issues. I knew that. So
Hmm.
I had to do the story I wanted to see with Batman. Right? That's
Hmm.
what he wanted to do. And again, like that, again, love it, hate it, but like his first story was like The Court of Owls, which I think is a phenomenal story. And it's actually influenced, it's introduced a new villain. It's sort of, it sort of changed things with Batman and stuff. And you go, oh, okay, that's what you're going to do. Like you've got to tell that story that you want to see. You want to do that. Not every story is always going to be that belter, but like, yeah, it's weird how films kind of want to be like, oh no, this is what we're going to throw in, and it's kind of like it's almost like all in rather than go, no, this is how we're going to pace it. This is what we want to do. It's unusual to me that I sort of see this more and more in modern cinema, where I'm like, yeah, you just throw in stuff in
Things
for
happen,
things happen for no real
right? You're going
purpose. It's
through the
just
motions.
yeah,
Like there is the appearance of a plot and a story here,
yeah,
but there's not actually a plot or story here.
yeah.
It feels oddly soulless. Yeah.
No, I mean, I recently watched the Crooked Man, the new Hellboy film.
Mm-hmm.
I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was quite good. It's a good horror film and stuff. But what was interesting about it was, I think some of the special effects in it are dreadful, and there are definite missteps in it. But one of the things that it does, you can tell it's written by a comic writer because it kind of knows, like throughout the film, it's like, oh, this is going to happen to allow this to happen. Like
Mm-hmm.
these things have got to be connected. And although there are issues with it, there is a kind of a sense of going like, oh, this was approached like a comic script. I can see it in it. Like, there are certain things that have to be in place for these things to happen, and it was considered in that kind of way. And it's just interesting to see because Mike Mignola was obviously wrote the script and was heavily involved and stuff in it, and so you can sort of see that and you go, okay, you know, it could have done with more money and it would have been better, but like just that attribute to sort of plot and to like the thought to like character, but not having to do it heavy handed. Like there's a character that's been damaged by war, he's got PTSD and stuff, and he's got these issues. But there's like some flashbacks, and you get sort of like hints of what that is, and it's always like the right information at the right time, not now we're going to stop for an exposition dump because that's how we do things. Like, but at the end of Act One, now we need to catch everybody else up. So this character's now going to tell their origin story, and you go, like, no, that's not how this fucking happens. Just stop doing that. Like, drop the information in, and either
As you go.
as you go, we can pick it
Yeah.
up. And I think that's part of the problem. There's just a lack of. You've said it before. We did it when we talked about. We'll probably come to a close on this, but like we've talked about when we've done the Twilight Zone. We've said it in some of the episodes in that. We've said like, there are episodes of that are so they know what they've got to do in a 25, 27-minute episode. And those episodes, some of those best episodes are incredibly crisp because they're sort of like, right, you've got 5 to 7 minutes to do this, then you've got to do the middle bit, then you've got then you've got the sort of like the twist or the reveal or the
Yeah.
lead out, and we're going to do that.
But
And they know
they
how to do it.
establish the character, they
Yeah.
establish the setting, right?
Yeah.
Get us to, I mean, it's just like the basics of writing.
Mm.
I don't understand how that's a lost art. I mean, and I mean, this is where like the basics of writing have been those basics have been replaced with get us to an action sequence.
Yeah.
What is the least amount of pages you can have to just give the audience the exposition needed and get to the next action sequence? Well, that's a model that has no characters.
No.
That's a model that has no stories.
That's a model that has action figures that get moved around.
Yeah. Right. But that's, I think, increasingly what we have, especially with these big budget movies. And unfortunately, even movies, like this that are not big budget movies, they're not, tentpole features, are looking to the tentpole features. And I think even in comics, they're looking to the tentpole features increasingly, and imitating their style of writing as opposed to, actual writing, you know. So yeah, and this is, I guess, a symptom. This movie is, I guess, a symptom of that.
I think so. I think this is. I think in years to come. I mean, we're still quite close with this. Is 2021. But I think in the next sort of like 5, 6, 10 years, whatever, we'll look back at that period and you'll look at like there'll be a cluster of films that we will see as like, oh, they're the failed franchise starters.
Oh yeah,
There's
yeah.
a spate of them that just, I mean,
And none of
weirdly,
them have going to have any life, right?
no, they're
Because
gone,
like
forgotten.
they're none of those are going to have long-term life on, nobody
Well,
wants to go back and watch the failed franchise that includes all of these references to
yeah,
things that never got panned
well,
out. Bad 50s movies have a
yeah,
longer life than that,
yeah.
right? Because
Well,
at least they are what they are.
recently for the Story That Time and Space book, I wrote about John Carter, and
Hmm.
one thing I cover is why I see that it failed. And actually, this is something I touched on that Disney was kind of ahead of the curve at that point. Pirates of the Caribbean were sort of aging out, and they were looking for their new franchise, and they were banging out all kinds of things. Uh, the Sorcerer's Apprentice, John Carter, Lone Ranger,
Tron
Tomorrowland.
Legacy.
What?
Tron Legacy.
Tron Legacy, exactly another one where they were just sort of like, oh, here's all the franchise starters that can replace Pirates of the Caribbean, but they were so focused on them being, big
Hmm.
budget, big boom, aha, that they were always too big and too cumbersome, but also focused on the wrong thing. Like, who the frick know? Like, I like the Lone Ranger film, but like, who the hell's going to watch like a $250 million Lone Ranger film? Like,
Right.
that was never going to make money. John Carter's the same thing. It's massively over budgeted for what it is. It's sort of ridiculous how much money was spent on those films for them to expect to become franchise starters. Like, it's insane.
Yes.
But
And make it fun and
mm,
sell people on the character. Sell
yeah,
people on the character and the setting and the premise, right?
yeah.
You can do that whether you are 200 million or whether you're 2 million.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter. But if you don't have that, you don't have anything,
Yes,
right? I mean,
exactly.
that is what starts a franchise.
Mm, yeah, I think this is one of those interesting ones. But anyway, I think
Hollywood, listen up.
yeah, no, we're telling you, like
Scott and Julian. That's true, though. I mean,
yeah, there's a reason that again, the quality may have been up and down, but there's a reason that the original series Star Trek crew were making films up until the early 90s,
mhm.
and they mostly made money.
Yeah,
People
yeah.
wanted to see those characters again and again, and I think, yeah, it's interesting. But anyway, let's end it on that. So that's done for the GI Joe series. I'll be curious to see if and when anything happens beyond for this franchise or for this IP. I'm interested to see what they try and do with it.
Don't hold your breath. Because the Rise of the Beast has that stupid, like,
Hmm. Well, that's not going to
I
go
mean,
anywhere. That
yeah,
film
I
bombed
mean,
to death and all. We'll get to that
yeah.
one day on
So,
Stories Out of Time and Space.
God, God, one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life.
It battles
Uh,
it with Last Night. I can't believe that.
Last Night is, Oscar-winning masterpiece compared to Rise of the Beast. I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
whew, yeah. So yeah, I would not be holding my breath on G.I. Joe, but it's
No.
crystal clear what it needs, right? And
Mm,
what it needs is just reboot it, go back to basics, do the Snake Eyes origin movie if you want, do it as we described, do a fun G.I. Joe movie that gets you to at the end of the first movie, the status quo, if you want to do Rise of Cobra or whatever. Yeah, I mean, there are ways of doing this.
mm-hmm.
But you got to be focused on doing it definitively and selling people on the characters and the fun and the universe.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it's
No, I
not
agree.
hard.
It's not. It can be done. I just but we will see. Anyway, that's it for GI
Yeah.
Joe. We've done a full retrospective, and this has been kind of fun actually. Welcome to
Yo, Joe.
Yo Joe. I'm sure there'll be more to talk about in the future. We'll sort of hit on some of the franchises, but for those listening to this on Stories Out of Time and Space, down the line. I hope you've enjoyed because we've been sort of doing our exclusive stuff on there. If you're listening to 20th Century Geek, go listen to Stories That Time of Space. This is just Julian and I covering off science fiction films. And we've got things like RoboCop coming up and a whole bunch of other things. We're going to do like a redux of other films that we sort of did sequels for and bits and pieces. So we're going to be more Star Trek, some more Kong and Godzilla and other pieces as well. So that's going to be quite exciting. And
Yeah.
on 20th Century Geek, I think I'm looking at doing some stuff on the X-Files. So, keeping it light.
Sounds
Anyway,
good.
yeah. Julian, thank you very much for this
Thank you.
conversation. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And we shall see you on the next episode.